Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Craig Baldwin, partner at UpSource, with another episode of Creative Outcomes. So I hope you indulge me today. I don't have my typical setup, and we're actually back to sharing a screen. In front of me, I have a sample account plan, or really revenue plan for 2026, which would be the current year in which we're recording this podcast. And Agency Co. is the name of my sample or fake agency. And what I have in front of me, as someone who may be a partner or someone who manages revenue in this case, is a plan for the year. The reason I bring this up is today's topic is all about an over-reliance on new sales or new customers as a part of running your agency. Now, I say over-reliance as if that is a bad thing. And I should state, hopefully, that just like I always do, what I'm going to share with you is directional advice, as I would usually call it. Some might just say opinion, but these are effectively summarized thoughts which have been gleaned from working with hundreds of agencies over the course of the last decade. And of course, today, UpSource works with today about 140 agencies. And so we see many common patterns or pitfalls. And think of this as something that is more to think about as you're working through your own revenue forecasting plans, be it for the full year, the rest of 2026, and I'm sure many of you have just worked on that, or even just the upcoming quarter, whatever that may be. But I'm just trying to give you some food for thought. And given this is a topic that comes to my desk pretty frequently, I want to talk about what it means to have an over-reliance on new business, and I want to set the context appropriately for that. First and foremost, if you are an agency who produces a lot of new business, which is to say customers which you do not currently have, but you go out and find them in the marketplace and bring them in and sign contracts with them, and that's a big part of your go-to-market, a big part of your overall revenue, and you have proven over time that you're quite good at that, I would say kudos to you. And perhaps this topic is not even for you. Now, I think the lingering question I may ask is if you are having to over rely, or if new customers are a disproportionate share of, and we'll talk about what disproportionate could be, but a disproportionate share of your overall revenue, why is that? Is it because you're so good at sales and you continue to climb upwards with your overall revenue within your agency? Or is it because you experience moderate to high churn levels and you're constantly having to refill your client roster, your revenue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because for many of our clients that we've worked with in the past who have high new business targets or have them over an extended period of time, that is in fact the case. They have them because they actually lose these clients pretty frequently after they bring them in. Now, I should characterize lose for this conversation. If you're an organization or agency who provides a one-time service, think about a design and build agency from a digital perspective would be a good example, or branding. Effectively, especially if you're working in the SMB space, you require a high throughput of clients, and you're probably working on multiple projects at a time, and you're going out and you're finding the next project quite commonly, and thus over relying, I think, but maybe I should abstain from that yet, but just relying on a high mix of new clients. I can tell you my experience says that unless you are so good at that from an operational and service perspective, and so good at that from a go-to-market perspective, and so niche in what you offer and who you offer it for, probably most importantly, that is a very hard way to live. Because think about it as a hole in your boat. If you're having to go out and find the next new client to replace the one you just lost because you don't have additional services to offer to that client, then you're always looking for the next new deal. And from someone who's managed revenue my entire life and have multiple organizations, finding the new logo or the new revenue target, whatever they may be, is far more challenging than finding additional revenue or re-upping existing revenue from a current client. And so what you're effectively saying is if you have that type of agency or that type of business, is you are putting yourself in a position where you're working on the most challenging type of client to get from a sales and marketing perspective. You're always on hard mode, if you will. Now, bear in mind, as I said earlier, that could be your model, and you could be great at that. And if you are, turn this off, go do something else. Okay. However, if you're not great at that and you're struggling, then I would offer that you should take a deeper look as to the services you provide, the audience you sell them to, and your ability to drive a real lifetime value off of those logos that you build. Which is to say, if you don't have a strong lifetime value, maybe you should think about ways you could, right? But I don't want to get too far in the strategics because I want to stay at a more tactical level in this conversation. Now, if you're an organization who has a couple of big clients and you do a lot of different projects for those big clients, and your ability to succeed and thrive on those big clients really rests on the budgets they offer to you each and every year, that is not a bad place to be. But of course, we have to be able to go out in the marketplace and replace those clients from time to time, or at least find new ones that we can build up into replacements. I used to have a boss who told me the best time to find your next anchor client is as soon as you signed your last one. Because every client relationship, whether we want to believe it or not, has a half-life, and they will decay over time, whether we like it. Now, it doesn't mean they may not experience some growth in the beginning, and maybe the growth happens at different parts of the relationship, but I don't know of any businesses who have had a client forever, okay? So that is another thing to think about is if you're on the other end of that extreme, you need to be able to spend some time, some money, some resource on adding new clients or client to your overall revenue mix each and every year. Otherwise, you run the risk of having a hole blown through your P&L, or especially your top line revenue, because you didn't get out there and replace some of these anchor clients as soon as you should have, or at least work towards replacing them, right? So we see both ends of those extremes often. And then, of course, there's many organizations who are in the middle. These are organizations who may provide, for the lack of a better term, more homogeneous services. They may have high throughput, or maybe they have a more heterogeneous mix, and they have maybe 10 clients, and each client represents, close to 100,000 or a little bit over 100,000 or whatever that may be. But you can see where on that spectrum from one end to the other, there's a lot of different variations you can have in between. That's probably where the majority of you are living. Now, you may not be doing design and build. You may be a media agency, you may be PR, you may be production, but stick with me for a second. When you are working on your revenue plan or forecast, at least over the length of a calendar year or your fiscal year, I find that 20% of that revenue number coming from net new business, which is to say is likely business which I have not yet identified, but there may be some things in the pipeline, but in most cases not yet identified, is a good, healthy, and almost optimistic percentage of overall revenue. Now, what is 20%? What does that look like? Craig, what are you talking about? So let's use this forecast as an example. Right here, I am the faux CRO of the agency co, and I have a 2025 revenue of 4.2, so I had a good year last year, or at least it felt good to me. I have a growth target for my revenue of 15%, which now gives me just over 4.8 that I need to hit. And we'll get into this target S&M spend. The question is, if this is my top-down projection of what I would like to accomplish, if you're following a lot of the best practices we've talked about in the past around account planning and revenue forecasting, you're also doing a bottoms up. which is to say, let's ground this number in reality. So you see each of these current accounts I have at my agency, and you see the revenue, which has already been booked and we stand to earn. Now, of course, we need to make the delineation between booked revenue or projects and earned. I might book $1 million, but I'm not going to most likely earn $1 million in January 2026. I'm going to earn it over the duration of the contract or over the duration of the project, right? So what I'm trying to reflect here is that I have a number of already booked projects, and this is my expected revenue associated with those projects over time. So if I think about what is already in my pocket, so to speak, I've already secured for my business, I have just over $3 million secured as a part of that 4.8 number, that goal we talked about for 2026. Not bad, right? Now, in most organizations where you're not in that high throughput example, you're not relying on tons of new clients, you probably have an account management or account executive function who is managing these relationships and trying to grow them. Of course, you want to try to grow revenue at these clients. And so here, what we're showing is target additional bookings, and which would then translate into revenue over time. Some of these relationships, there's a lot to be gained, some of them a little, some of them none. These are all conversations you should be having as a part of your, at a minimum, annual account planning, but hopefully you're having these conversations more frequently. So for those folks which are on my team, John, Terry, Kathy, who are account managers or account executives at my organization, they each have new revenue goals associated to current logos, right? So this is revenue I need them to go find in those relationships. In a perfect world, they do more, but this is the number that I'm going to hold them to account for. So I've got 785,000, which when I add that to my $3 million number, I've got about 3.8. So that leaves me with about another million, a little bit more than that I need to go find as a part of new business. Now, I have a new business person on my team. They answer RFPs. They work with my marketing team on the collateral that we're developing that we put out in the marketplace. They show up to some events. They are working on a lot of pitches and leading pitches with our creative team. That individual has their own number that they're working towards. From a bookings perspective, they're working towards a number of 1.2, which we think will translate into 1.1 in revenue. Again, I just want to make that distinction between what has been signed and what has been earned over time. So if they're able to go find 1.1 in revenue that we're able to earn over the course of 2026, I now have a total between those three types or buckets of 4.9, which is just over my goal of 4.830. When I'm doing account planning exercises or revenue forecasting exercises for my organization for the year, I always want my projected, or what I'm calling here as committed revenue by my team, to be slightly above my actual target within the business, because I want some buffer, I want some margin for error, and I'd rather miss to the upside than miss to the downside. So that's why this number is slightly larger than the 4.8. Now, let's get to the meat. So Elizabeth, as the person who's in charge of new logos at our organization, if I look at what her revenue number is as a portion of the overall revenue that we're hoping to get in 2026, it's just over 20%. Now, in my experience, 20% really is the threshold. If we have a fantastic year and Elizabeth has a fantastic year, I think she can do the 1.1. And I'm going to give her all the support she needs to accomplish that. But I'm only putting that number out there because she's proven to me in the past that she can accomplish such a big number. If I were to guess for the very first time, I would never put that large of a number on her. Okay. Now, why is that big? Or why can it be troublesome, is maybe the better way to put it, if I'm relying on a much higher portion of my overall revenue to come from new customers or clients? Here's why. Because those types of clients or that type of revenue is the riskiest of all the revenue that's sitting in this forecast. I already know that I've signed, in my case, in this example, $3 million, and we are just going to have to work that over the course of the year, but I have no sales risk around $3 million. There is some sales risk around the 785,000. However, these are existing relationships that we've had for a long period of time. I have a great account team. And again, because I already have, in this case, MSAs with these organizations, my ability to find additional revenue or additional SOWs or win additional money from adjacent departments that we don't work with today is much easier than in a situation where I have a lot of barriers to entry in any one client or any one logo that I do not work with yet today, right? Now, let's get down to new biz. So in new biz, not only do I have the risk of, well, I may not have an MSA with this client. I don't know the key stakeholders. I don't know how much budget they have. We've talked about in the past pipeline hygiene. So even just to qualify a deal, I always like the BANT method because it's so simple. Do they have budget, authority, need, and timing? So that would be kind of like pipeline risk, right? But to take this a step further, if I'm Elizabeth and I don't even have any logos in the pipeline, now I have real go-to-market risk. I have not identified, let alone have I secured any amount of dollars in my pipeline to manage that risk. And I am now sitting with the single riskiest type of revenue that any business can have, which is yet to be identified, and we don't know where it's going to come from, right? That makes me very nervous as a business owner or as a revenue leader. Also makes me nervous as the person who sits in the finance seat for your agency. Now, you could give me reasons why that risk can be mitigated because you do this every single year. Elizabeth has a ton of support from the marketing team. She's proven at the last organization she knows how to do this. But when we set a plan for the year and we make new revenue such a big part of that plan, and it is very risky, if we miss that number, it is going to really have catastrophic consequence to the rest of our organization. Because if I don't get 1.1 and if I only get 500, well, that's a pretty big hole that I'm blowing through my plan that relates to my existing team, relates to the new hires I want to bring in, perhaps around new capabilities. And that even presumes I'm able to win anything. What if Elizabeth has a really bad year where everything just takes a little bit longer than we thought, or we're spinning our wheels with new offerings in the marketplace and she gets $0? Well, now I probably have to talk about cuts, and I don't want to do that, right? So I say this because I hope all of you who are working through the qualitative and the quantitative, when you have that quantitative brain on and you're looking at the spreadsheets, I want you to, yes, be looking at the numbers, but I want these numbers should represent some type of risk profile to you. And I often find that the qualitative behaviors are the things which can help me to mitigate risk or to change my risk profile. But the risk in many cases, as it sits in front of me, is what it is. It is very objective. The question is, can I change the odds with my time, money, directional decisions, right? So if you are relying on more than 20%, I hope you're very good at going out and finding new clients. And I hope that your agency is on the upswing and you're growing revenue year over year. If you're not, then I would ask you why. Do you have a hole in your ship or boat? Do you have higher than expected churn levels? That's the one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, if you do not have any new business, but you rely on the same couple of clients every year to bring you revenue, and some of that may already be booked. In fact, most of it probably already is. What would you do if you lost one of those big clients that represent 20, 30, 40% of your revenue? How are you mitigating that risk, which we've identified as probably not as risky, but given that it still makes up a very large percentage of your overall revenue, by default, there is a pretty sizable risk profile with that relationship. You may feel more certainty around it, but if for whatever reason you were to lose any of them, that would be a real devastating effects or have real devastating effects to your organization. So what are you doing from a new business perspective to mitigate that risk? I like 20% as the threshold. If you told me that new business will represent 10%, I would say I think that's a good conservative judgment. However, you should probably be doing more. It probably means you're under investing in your sales and marketing. There are lots of conversations to be had in between these numbers that I've thrown up, in between the types of organizations I'm talking to. And I am painting with broad strokes here because ultimately within 20 to 25 minutes, I have to. But these broad strokes are informed by patterns that we've seen over a very long period of time across many types of agencies and many sizes of agencies, right? The last thing I'll leave you with is the target sales and marketing spend. Now, are your account people in sales and marketing? Maybe, but probably not. If you are billing some of their time to the client, they're probably sitting in your your cost of goods sold. They don't have to be, but they probably are. If you're not billing any of their time and you view them as very revenue centric, which of course all account people are. However, if they're not billing any time and you need them to go find new dollars all the time, it is foreseeable that you would put them in the sales and marketing line item on your P&L. In this example, I have not. So each of my account managers here spend some time on these clients, bill some time on these clients. I've put them in the financial model when I do my estimations. And while they're not 70% utilized, they are utilized enough that I put them in cost of goods sold. But I do want them to go find more revenue, right? Elizabeth, her salary and her commission sits in sales and marketing. Travel, events, my marketing coordinator, sponsorships, that sits in sales and marketing, right? So a question we also get very frequently is, am I spending enough or am I spending too much? Now, some members of our team might say they like 6 to 8%. I like 8 to 10%. At the very top end of the range, I think your sales and marketing line item should be no more than 10% of your projected revenue for the year, which hopefully is your actual revenue by the end of the year. If you're spending more than 10%, it means you're probably more on that end where you're working with finding many new clients and you have to have a high replenishment rate of revenue. And so you could do that, that's okay, but the more you spend on sales and marketing, the less you have to spend on other things, right? If you're spending under 10%, then you're being moderately efficient and hopefully still getting adequate return for your dollars on the revenue that you're bringing in the door that you do not have currently. If you're spending under, let's say, 5%, you're probably underspending. Because now what you find yourself in is that problem we talked about on the other end of the spectrum, which is, are you doing enough to ensure the future of your business in case you lose a big client? Again, insurance is probably the right term here, right? If we're talking about risk and we're talking about the different ways that things can go wrong or go right, that's what that sales and marketing line item should be. And at the low end, it should be insurance. At the higher end, it should be opportunity for more growth. But it has to be within reason. So I'm going to leave you with that. 20% is my threshold. If it's much higher or much lower in any meeting that I'm in with a client, that's when I start to ask some very pointed questions about why. What is it about our business? What it is about our go-to-market? What is it about our ability to do or not do things that we think it's something materially different than 20? And if the answers make sense, they're reasonable, come with past performance, then I won't push anymore. However, if they're not grounded in any sort of past performance reality or uh, very informed point of view, which demonstrates to me that they are capable of doing it, then alarm bells go off in my mind, and I see nothing but risk. And when you talk about 10, 20, 30% of revenue, that's a very risky portion of your year that could hang in the balance. And again, we're trying to eliminate that risk. We're trying to get certainty around it. So use this as a very general rule of thumb. If you want to talk about this topic more specifically, of course, you're always happy to talk to me or talk to one of our team members that maybe you work with. Or frankly, if you have a difference of opinion, I'd love to hear it. Because of course, we're trying to learn and get better each and every day. But today, this is where we're at. So with that, thank you for joining me about over-reliance on new business. This is Craig Baldwin, partner at Upsource Accounting. Hope you have a great day. Thank you.